Daige, Chairman of the city's High-Speed Rail Commission. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
There's increasing chatter and conversation in the community about the high-speed rail all aboard Florida. A lot of questions, a lot of letters to the editor, a lot of reporting. And I hoped we could speak with you today about what you understand about this project, what you think the community can and should be doing to position itself for what seems to be coming. Okay. What are we looking at? What if the project moves forward, what should the community expect?
Well, what the folks have been coming in expressing their concerns to us, this is some of the concerns. Number one, the speed. According to the folks all aboard Florida, the speed through the center of Vero Beach will be 110 miles an hour, and that's pretty fast. That's hurricane force winds. The train is going by one of our playgrounds. It's very close to our Chamber of Commerce. Also, the old aboard Florida folks, they're laying an additional track to the west of what we have now here in Vero Beach. The other concerns are the noise of the horns with the speed of the train. Once it hits the county, people are understanding pretty much the horn's going to sound the whole way through the county. What we're being told is going to be 32 trains a day, one every half hour. The last one through, it's our understanding, last high-speed train through Vero will be around 11 o'clock at night. There's been a number of concerns. The folks to the west of the tracks, how are they going to get to the hospital? How are emergency vehicles going to reach them? That's some of the concerns.
Right. So what are the facts around those concerns? Will the horn sound the entire way through the county? Will there be quiet zones established so that that's not the case? What do you think we're really looking at?
It's our understanding, because the train is moving so fast, you'll pretty much, once it hits the county, as they're blowing it, it's probably going to sound like just one continuous blast through the county. And even though there are blasts, according to the rules of how they blast their horn. So that's what people have been asking about. Again, we're told it's going to go very fast, 110 miles through the community.
Are we looking at quiet zones?
Quiet zones, that's really up to the municipalities. It's up to the county. We have 8 crossings within the city limits. 2 are not under our control. 1 is under the, or on our twin pairs. You can say that's 2, but they consider it 1. That's the DOT folks, and there's another one at the county. We have to get permission if we're going to do quiet zones. Now, in the event that our city government decides to do a quiet zone, the responsibility is on the government. The funding for the quiet zone, it's also our understanding now there'll be additional insurance that will be required for the municipal to pay. The same thing with the county governments. There's been a lot of questions asked from concerned citizens about the quiet zones, but again, it's up to our elected officials if they're going to move forward with the quiet zones.
If the federal or state regulations require a sealed corridor for a train traveling at that speed through a population area, will that sealed corridor include what you would consider a quiet zone?
Well, let's take a look at what All Aboard Florida says about a sealed corridor, because that has come up, of people have heard that sealed corridor. I've asked questions when you use the term sealed corridor, what do you mean by that? Mm-hmm. What type of fencing are you going to be using? We really haven't gotten a straight answer yet on that issue. All right, sealed corridor, when you go into what All Aboard Florida has to say about it, in the federal guidelines and federal rules, it is suggested to have a sealed corridor. That is not a rule. So All Aboard Florida is saying we don't really have to do that because it's not an actual rule, it's a suggestion. Now, with that being said, one other quick piece of information here. There was an engineer that's been taking a look at the study so far in the corridor, and I'll just go real quick. This was a report, and all the stuff that I'm talking about today is on file at City Hall. You can call our city clerk and ask her for any information that I'm talking about today. And it's Miss Locke. Her number is 978-4700. at our next meeting, we are going to be discussing how to set up a site that's a little bit easier for people to get to, so they can actually go in, do a click, and all the information will come up. Right now, give her a call. She can help you go through it. We have at least about this much material that's on file, which is quite a bit. Back to the engineer situation.
If that's a 10-inch file, it's 9.9 inches more than most people are going to be willing to go through.
Well, there's something in there for everybody.
Okay.
You may be looking, we're talking about a sealed corridor. That, a lot of folks, business owners have concerns with that. So they'll be able to go in and cull through the documents, come to where they need to take a look at that nomenclature and see for themselves what it has to say in writing.
Right.
We had a lot of questions on the speed. Some folks said, well, it's not actually going to be 110. But when you go through the documents, you take a look at some of the videos that are on file, right from Mr. Roberts, which is one of the development arms for All Aboard Florida. He has said it will go through 110. If you go look at All Aboard Florida's paperwork, it talks about the 110 miles an hour. This engineer's report for 2014, this engineer talks like this. In my professional opinion, I respectfully disagree with the project's approach in that they are not exercising appropriate safety practices and reasonable care when designing for the high-speed passenger rail service. So already, with an engineer taking a look at their project, they're not in agreement with the assessment. Now, with what we're talking about, the assessment, sometime in June, according to what we're being told by the authorities from All Aboard Florida, is a study called the EIS study. The Environmental Impact Study is coming out sometime in June. We have not seen that in writing. Now, in that EIS study, there's a time frame there that the general public is allowed to make comments, and that also means our government entities can have their packets ready to go to make their comments on what they find going on with this study with the input from their community. Now, the days that the study has right now are 30 to 45 days. A number of weeks ago, I stood before the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council that folks have read about in the paper. A number of weeks ago, I had put in a request that they make a request to the Federal Rail Administration for an additional 45 days. That request hasn't been yes or no yet, so we're patiently waiting. It's my understanding that our county government here had asked for more time. So hopefully they will grant us more time. We don't know for sure yet. And that's our time frame that these concerns that I talked about a few moments ago, that our community has, our elected officials have a number of concerns, that concerns from our general public has come to their ears. These issues will need to be addressed. Now, these issues, when we talk about them, these concerns, they will have to be addressed appropriately in the legal format, so when it goes to the Federal Rail Administration, they take a look at it to see if it's legitimate concerns and if some type of mitigation is going to have to take place.
Who ultimately signs off on this project? Someone had told me it's actually the State Department of Transportation that has the final say on this project.
DOT makes sure that they're following the federal guidelines, the Department of Transportation. That is their responsibility. They have their guidelines that they go by with their transportation rules, and if it meets what they have in their rule book, the project's approved. People have heard about the corridor north of here, the 528, that they were securing leases. All Aboard Florida, quite a while ago, worked out a situation with the folks there at the transportation at DOT for right-of-way. Those leases are taken care of. There's some more tweaking to be done, but that part of the project's been approved.
It seems like the two options for the community are to try to turn this back, derail it, some people have said, and the other is to try to mitigate the impacts on the community, or to pursue both objectives at the same time, not knowing what the ultimate result would be of any effort to try to gain disapproval for the project from the state or federal government. Where are you at in your efforts?
I think with that being said, as with all the research that I've done thus far with this project's been in the making for what I know of, over 2.5 years, and before that, there's been quite a bit of legwork that these companies have done. They've met with a number of upper officials, they've met with state officials, federal officials, local officials, when you go back and look at the past. And a number of years ago, everybody was pretty pleased with this project. So they got a lot of thumbs up. Now going forward, since I've been looking into this, our community has a number of concerns with this project on how it's going to impact us here, of things that are going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our residents and our businesses. Now, we have to, as a community where we need our elected officials, we have to make our case legally to do the mitigation process.
And what is the case the city would make?
I think the case, let's just use something here that everybody can grab onto real quick. Most folks in our community, City of Vero Beach, are familiar where the tracks are. When you drop another track to the west of that, that's going to be very close to a playground. That's a historical playground.
Weren't there already 2 tracks there in the past?
There was track there, but you didn't have a high-speed train.
Right.
Then you have the Chamber of Commerce there. So those 2 areas alone, and there's a number of other issues, but let's just use those 2 areas.
Well, if
there's going to be an impact.
Excuse me, but if you have 1 track, 2 tracks, 6 tracks, if you fence them off from the playground area with a sealed corridor, whether you have 1 or 2 tracks, you've dealt with the issue of people being able to wander, children wandering out on that track. Right?
And that's a very good point that you raised as far as sealing the corridor. But as I informed you a little while ago with what the old Board of Florida, how they feel about a sealed corridor, it's really not in the rule book from the federal guidelines or rules that they have to do that. Now back to what I was just saying about the mitigation, as a community we could make the case and make the legal case. This is these concerns, and here's the data to back up what we're saying, where it is going to have an impact, and you have to demonstrate legally of how it's going to have an impact.
I'm trying to drill down to the specific policy initiatives that you think the community should be pushing for. Should the community be pushing for quiet zones? Should the community be pushing for a sealed corridor? What do you think we can reasonably ask for or insist on that would mitigate the impact of this if in fact it's going to go forward?
You just named 2 very important issues. The quiet zones, which, because with a quiet zone there's additional safety features with these gates when they come down. Another issue that people are asking about, can we slow the speed down through our community? And those are some of the issues that it looks like we could mitigate on those.
It seems inconceivable to me that you would have a train traveling at 120 miles an hour near a playground without some barrier between that playground and the tracks. I can't imagine being comfortable operating that train and assuming the liability. So I don't see why a sealed corridor just doesn't seem like the obvious solution to that.
Right, you and others, and it's what they're telling us, it's 110 miles going through our city. That's what they're telling us now. Back to the sealed corridor, to me, that's a serious concern because of our children. And that's something I'm hoping we could mitigate and make our case to the Federal Rail Administration. This needs to be a sealed corridor, and as far as the expense of that should be borne by the company that's coming through doing the impact on your community. We have to make that case.
Well, if they're going to pay for that, it looks like they're going to pay for it with money they hope to borrow from the federal government. Of course, the federal government gets its money from us.
Yes.
But there is no federal money. It's all taxpayer money administered by the federal government. Right? So we're going to pay for that along with the taxpayers throughout the country. Right?
A lot of people feel that way, yes.
Caroline Ginn, speaking to the Indian River Shores Town Council last week, said, "Do no harm and do it with your own money." That was an interesting point. So one way of objecting to this, some seem to be pursuing a strategy of objecting to this by trying to prevent the company from being able to borrow federal money.
There are a number of groups that have come together that feel exactly like what you do. They feel it's their dollars and they would like it blocked because in some cases a lot of the community feels that they've been misled.
Well, it's interesting, the governor turned down federal money to underwrite a high-speed rail between Orlando and Tampa. And here the government isn't underwriting it so much as loaning them money, the collateral being the trains that will be of no value to anyone if and when it becomes clear the project isn't viable economically. What kind of collateral is that, really?
Well, yeah, what are we going to do with a railroad track and a choo-choo train?
Yeah, I mean, if you put your boat up as collateral for the loan on the boat and you sink the boat, you don't have any insurance.
Right. Yeah, a lot of folks have
Where
had
is
that
the
concern.
collateral?
What are we going to do with it?
Right. So what do you think is achievable here in terms of mitigating the impact on the community?
I feel with the research that we have done, we have a very strong case here, number one, with the speed, number two, with the sealed corridor, and we have some sensitive buildings along the corridor that we can make a case on as far as some of the noise and vibration, because we're going to have along the corridor, All Aboard Florida wants to increase the use of that corridor. They've said in some of our meetings that the corridor is underutilized, so they want to increase their freight traffic. So that's also going to have an impact on our community. Our business community has really some concerns about the increased freight.
I understand that your commission is charged with looking at the high-speed rail, right? Is freight a part of that?
It's the corridor is a part of it. The council, gave us a charge. Go out and get all the information that you possibly can. Obviously, bring in the facts, bring in the documentation, anything that's written out there. Go out into the community, ask questions. If there's groups of folks that want to hear from you, go share with them the information that you compiled. In fact, May 15th, I will be addressing our hospital board here at this county in the Minerva County Chambers at their meeting, the elected board, to bring my findings to them and to hear their thoughts on this situation, because obviously that's the hospital board and folks want to find out what they have to say on this. Again, back to that's another important issue, or how are people going to get to the hospital from the west side of the tracks?
Well, let me ask you this then. If you all are also looking at the impact of possible freight traffic, increased freight traffic, Commissioner O'Brien was making the point that regardless of what people on the Treasure Coast want, the Panama Canal is being widened. Regardless of what the people on the Treasure Coast want, the Port of Miami is being expanded to accommodate the increased freight that will come through the widened Panama Canal.
That's correct.
That freight is going to wind up on freight lines coming north along the eastern seaboard.
That's correct.
Are we going to be better off if that freight is moving on a double track or a single track? And wouldn't we be better off, with the expanded capacity, so that these trains, when they're off schedule, aren't sitting for long periods of time? I mean, his view is that if the freight is inevitable, we're going to be better off with the double tracks.
Well, we also have to find, with that being said, there's an assumption that the track that's going to be designated for the high-speed train is also going to carry freight. That conversation has come up here quite a bit here in the last few weeks. We're in the process right now of sending an email to Rusty Roberts, that's part of All Aboard Florida, to ask the question, is this line just going to be for high-speed passenger service, or are you going to put freight on there? We need the answer from the folks that are, it's their corridor. What exactly are they going to do with it? I don't like to make assumptions of what's going to happen. That's why this question's come up. It's been asked just like you asked it. So I'm going to shoot the question, and I'm hoping by the time we have our next Rail Commission meeting, we'll have an answer from Mr. Roberts on that question.
Well, unless U.S. consumption is increasing considerably, and it's not, this freight coming into Miami is freight that used to come into the west coast of the country.
That's correct.
So it's going to be its ultimate distribution points are along the east coast. So that's going to move up the eastern seaboard on these rails, or increase traffic on I-95.
Right, and since we're in the discussion of freight, let's say I think a week and a half ago I was out on the road looking at our crossings with DOT officials. We had representative there with us also, Mrs. Mayfield, Representative Mayfield. One of my questions to the DOT official that looks at the plans when they come in, see if the freight trains and all the above meet the certain regulations and criteria. One of my questions was, well, how do you actually figure the situation with freight trains coming through your community? They call it blocking. And I think there are some rules on the books that you can only block off so many intersections. Now, with that being said, if they increase the freight, the rules on the books now are quite old. And I was talking to the DOT fellow, I said, well, maybe in the future, because this is a new concept with the high-speed rail, the increased freight along the corridor, I said, perhaps we're going to have to start looking at some new regulations at the federal level, because that's where your train companies actually are regulated, is through the federal rules. And as this process goes forward, we're going to have to contact our local officials that go to our state officials, that go to our federal officials. We may need some new regulations put on the books that will regulate the length of the freight trains and the blocking as they go through. How many intersections can they block? Then back to the emergency vehicles getting through. Our community is not the only community with concern with getting to the hospital, also with emergency vehicles getting back and forth over the crossings. And in our case, the city of Vero Beach, our police station is on the east side. How are they going to get to us when we have an emergency?
Well, aren't there some police and other emergency vehicles always positioned on both sides?
Not at all times, no. And see, it also depends too, what kind of workload they're under. And mentioning emergency vehicles, and this is something I'm going to be drilling down here in the near future, is what type of backup plan we have to have in place here in this county for our emergency vehicles to get out to the tracks in the event that one of the high-speed passenger train derails. So we have, what are the backup plans? What do we have to do? Because whatever backup plans, maybe they need to add something else or whatever, I don't know. But if you add more things, that's more of an expense to your community for your emergency vehicles to take care of an emergency situation.
What are the next steps for your commission?
Our next step for our commission, we're having Phil Mattson come in to give us an update on the EIS study.
And Phil is?
Phil is the director of the MPO here.
Which is a metropolitan planning organization.
Yes, sir, it is. And he's going to give us an update where they're at on that. Also, we have Commissioner Solari is going to be visiting with us to give us an update with what their commission is working on. From there, I have a couple other things I'm working on with the commission, and it will be time for us to make some recommendations to our council that they can bite into to see what they want to do with. Also, at the next meeting, there's a sunset on our commission. Our commission is due to sunset in June. I need to put it before the other commissioners to see if they would like to continue on, and if so, we need to funnel that to the council.